This conference will now be recorded.
All right, folks, so thank you for coming to a class today. We're going to be looking at the digestive system as well as the actual nutrition that the digestive system will be processing. So we will be going into chapter 11, and let's begin by sharing the beginning of the PowerPoint. And I'm going to just press pause for one moment here and mute. All right, folks, so chapter 11, digestion. So let's take a look at the digestive tract. So when we're thinking of the digestive tract, we're thinking of a tube that can be larger or smaller depending upon where you are in the body and where you are as far as whether you're at the beginning or at the end. And the tube can be larger or smaller. There can be different processes that take place. There can be different chemicals that are added to the nutrients that you've taken into your body, but it's just a large tube. Okay? So we're going to see here that the food is broken down. So that's the act of digestion, whether it's the act of mechanical digestion, as far as if you were to chew and break down the components that you took into your body, or whether you actually have the nutrients that you've taken in being broken down by chemicals. Okay, so whether it's chemical or mechanical digestion, this is what's taking place within the digestive tract, and then the action of absorption is taking place also to not only just break down the nutrients, but to take them into the body to be used. Okay? You'll see here that a thick, moist mucus protects the tube and enhances diffusion, the movement of materials from inside of that tube to the bloodstream, and then to be spread throughout the whole body. Here you're just given an image to see as far as from the beginning of the digestive tract to the actual, there we go, to the actual end of the digestive tract as far as the anus. From the oral cavity, the mouth, to the anus, and then in between all the processes that are going to occur. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. You'll see here that this is an image that's showing you inside of the digestive tract and what goes on as far as an example of the layers that are taking place. So when we think of the mucus, this slippery substance that would be lining the digestive tract, well, then think of what layer would that be? That layer would be the mucosa layer, which contains the mucus. Then we have the submucosa layer. This is the next layer in, as far as going outward, and then the serosa layer would be the outer layer. So there are connective tissue layers that contain different connective tissues, muscle, as well as blood vessels and nerves, and also lymphatic vessels. Okay. So we have here the mucosa, the deepest layer, innermost layer is submucosa, and then the serosa layer. So those three layers. And you'll see here as far as smooth muscle, not skeletal muscle, but smooth muscle, type of muscle that we have no voluntary control over, this is what's present within the digestive tract. We can call it the GI tract, we can call it the alimentary canal. There are multiple terms that can be used to describe the digestive tract. So these sphincters, these are circular arrays of smooth muscle. And so a sphincter will allow for material to stop material from entering into the next area of the digestive tract, right? So we have these areas where, let's go back here. So we have the esophagus, we have the stomach. So there's going to be a sphincter here, in order to keep material inside of the stomach for a period of time until it's ready then to be sent out of the stomach into the duodenum, the beginning of the small intestines. And also, as far as the esophagus is concerned, this bolus, this material that's nutrition that's brought into the oral cavity, chewed, and then swallowed and sent through the pharynx, the throat, and into the esophagus. And then it's not just like a tube that's just open constantly, but there's a sphincter present. There's these smooth muscle that's present that will allow for material to enter and close when it doesn't want doesn't allow material to enter. So controls food passage. That's the best way to put it. And in particular, this is the gastroesophageal. So this is another term we can use to call the cardiac sphincter. And why would we call it the cardiac sphincter? Because the heart would be resting right here and very close to this area of the stomach. So cardiac sphincter, aka the gastroesophageal sphincter, also known as. Here you're seeing, as far as the esophagus, we see here the sphincter muscles relax, opening the passageway. They relax, and then they close. Muscles contract, closing the passageway, right? What can happen is that people can end up having digestive juices, stomach acid, present here that go back, reflux back into the esophagus. And we can actually have changes take place of the cells of the esophagus to the point where, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the term Barrett's esophagus, where there's actual definitive change taking place as a result of the continual irritation of the digestive juices, the acids entering, refluxing back up into this area of the distal portion of the esophagus. So mechanical processing and motility. So mechanical processes has to do with the actual, not so much the chemical action, right? But the actual process of the teeth, the tongue, the muscles that will help to break down the food and move it, okay? Secretion takes place because we actually have glands present connected to the digestive system, digestive tract, that will allow for release of enzymes. Primarily, I think of, we have salivary glands, we have the pancreas, which releases the majority of the enzymes into the duodenum, the beginning of the small intestine, and this is where primarily digestion takes place. Not so much in the stomach, it's not so much in the oral cavity, the mouth, but primarily in the duodenum. And this term digestion, whether it's chemically or mechanically broken down, so that the nutrients can be broken down into small materials, small molecules, and then absorbed by the body. So absorption, these digested, these broken down nutrients into their smaller molecules will then pass through the digestive tract and into the blood or into the lymph. And in particular, into the lymph would be, in the case of fats, going in that area. Elimination, we all get that. We all understand what that is, as far as undigested and unabsorbed residues are excreted or relieved out of the body, and because they're no longer able to be useful. Now, as we start from the beginning, and we just start from the oral cavity, from the mouth, we're thinking of what takes place as far as chewing and swallowing. The term chewing is also known as, aka also known as, mastication. So that term, chewing of your food, mastication. And you'll see here that it mentions the enamel of the tooth. So the enamel of the tooth is the hardest substance in the body. It's quite remarkable. And we don't want to, over time, damage the enamel. We can, as a result of acidic types of foods that are low that have a low pH that can help to wear away at it, as well as if we're not properly taking care of our teeth and chew things that are very hard and that could break the enamel. Yes, this can happen. Even though it's the hardest substance, it still can have that opportunity to break and to crack, into chip. Okay. Dentin and the inner pulp lie underneath. So when we think of the pulp of the tooth, we think of the soft tissue portion of the tooth, where we can have the nerve, where we can have blood vessels. This is contained within the inner portion of the tooth, the pulp. And this is interesting, and it makes much sense, is that the shape of the tooth will fit its function. So if the tooth, so depending upon the type of the tooth, so here we have an example of, so this would be more of like a molar type of a tooth, whether a premolar or a molar. And so there we're going to have more of a grinding action. You see how it's more of a flattened surface. Whereas when we look at the canines and the incisors, they're sharper. They have a sharper edge to them, and they'll be more for tearing and ripping. Okay, but the molars are more of your grinders. Salivary glands. So salivary glands are very important in that they help to release saliva into the oral cavity and get the nutrients that you've taken into your body, that you've taken into your mouth, to be moistened, to actually begin digestion as far as starch breakdown, carbohydrates with salivary amylase, right? And when we see this suffix, this ase, that will refer to an enzyme. Okay, an enzyme is a protein that works to break down the substances that we take into our body or speed up a reaction in the body. Okay. Mucins, these are also proteins that help to bind food bits into a ball, and this ball we call a bolus. So it's a bolus in the oral cavity. In the stomach, it's called chyme, and then as we get to the large intestines, we call that feces. Right? And you'll see here, this is interesting. So stomach acids inactivate salivary amylase. So salivary amylase, important in the oral cavity to begin the digestion of carbohydrates. But once the bolus, this bowl of food that's been chewed and broken down, enters into the stomach, really then the stomach will then, because it's highly acidic, it'll inactivate the amylase, but then it'll begin the process of protein digestion, begin the process. Really then primarily the majority of digestion is taking place within the duodenum, the beginning of the small intestines, and not so much in the stomach. Most people that they think, oh, digestion takes place in the stomach. Well, not the case. Yes, protein digestion begins in the stomach, but it doesn't just take place there only. Really, it's the small intestine. Here you're seeing an example of the parotid, submandibular, and sublingual. These are the salivary glands. And when you think of the parotid gland can get very swollen as a result of a case of the mumps. Just show you an image of someone who is suffering from mumps. Right, so yeah, there we go. Look at the image of this little guy. So his parotid gland on the left side there, right? Really, really very swollen in comparison to this side here. And if that looks painful, you're correct. It is very painful. Here we go as far as just showing you the difference between normal and swollen, okay? Where there's edema and there's as a result of an infection. Back to here. There we go. All right, so those are those salivary glands. So know that there's saliva that's being released, as well as there are mucus-producing glands also present within the oral cavity that add to the mix of the saliva. Okay. Now, swallowing primarily, beginning of swallowing would be a actual voluntary phase, and then there's the involuntary aspect of it, because again, as you take it and as it enters into the pharynx, your throat, then it's a matter of then the body takes over, and you have no conscious control over that. Okay. Some people can have control over a little bit of what's called the gag reflex, better control when you think of like a sword swallower, right? Someone who actually does for show and such. They'll take those swords and they'll be able to swallow, a 2.5 foot sword. They're able to get past the gag reflex as something enters into the deepest part of your oral cavity and beginning aspect of the pharynx, your throat. They're able to get past that, but really understand that really it's an involuntary aspect of swallowing when food enters, the bolus enters into the esophagus, into the pharynx and the esophagus. Okay. Also of note that the tongue, realize that there's smooth muscle action. Smooth muscle is involuntary, right? Skeletal muscle, right? If I'm doing something, I'm moving my hands, right? I'm actually moving these muscles that are involved in voluntary control. So those are skeletal muscle. The tongue is skeletal muscle because the tongue, I'm moving the tongue as I'm speaking to you right now. And we move the tongue as we eat and as we're chewing food because we want to keep the food in our mouth, in our oral cavity, as long as possible in order to break it down and then swallow when it's small pieces instead of swallowing when we have these very large pieces. I remember one guy on YouTube was talking about, you know, you're chewing an apple, and it's not like you're chewing an apple and like just swallowing the big chunks of the apple, like boulders of the apple. You're breaking it down into small pieces and then swallowing it, so that it's easier for your digestive tract then to move it, as well as also mechanically and chemically break it down. Now, interesting also of note, breathing stops momentarily as food is moving into the esophagus and such. Because if you were to have breathing continue, then could there be a possibility of aspirating food or liquid into the trachea and into the respiratory system, which would be a bad thing. Peristalsis is the actual term that is used in order to describe the muscular contractions that are taking place and moving the bolus through from, now this is a term we use, proximal and distal. Proximal is close to, distal is further away. So when I have food that I've chewed in my oral cavity, my mouth, and I'm swallowing it, it's going distal, it's going away from its place of origin, the oral cavity, and into the pharynx, the throat, also known as the throat, and into then the esophagus. So these muscular contractions that are smooth muscle contractions, I need to put that there. So this would be, smooth muscle contractions, right, that are taking place. And here you're seeing as far as, so this would be the oral cavity. Here's your tongue, right? The tongue is a pretty big muscle, right? By the way, has anybody ever eaten like beef tongue or any of those kind of, like, they actually, that's something that people will eat for like a deli sandwich or something. Oh, I don't know about that. Everybody's got their different food choices and such, but you'll see here, tongue is a very large skeletal muscle, and so we have this bolus that's been chewed, and now you'll see here I was entering into, so this would be the nasopharynx, the oral pharynx, and the laryngopharynx. So the pharynx, the throat, has three distinct areas, but they're all connected. Okay, so we have food entering into the oral pharynx, going into the laryngopharynx. You'll see here that the epiglottis is covering the trachea, the larynx, the voice box, and the trachea. And so then the food will then enter into the esophagus that you're seeing here. These peristaltic muscular contractions are moving the food from proximal to distal, to further deeper within your body. And then they will pass through this gastroesophageal sphincter here, or aka the cardiac sphincter, and enter into the stomach. So I'll stop for a moment. Yeah, that's funny as far as the digest. Yeah, so it's good that digestive system, we're studying it during the time of Thanksgiving. Does anybody have any questions or comments at all? Any questions? Okay, good. All right, so I will hide everyone and continue on. So we get to the stomach. So the stomach is a very acidic structure. So within the stomach, this large pouch that can expand, it has what's called rugae present within. These folds allow for the stomach to expand as food enters into it, and mixing and storage of this food for a period of time. So in other words, know that food doesn't enter into the stomach and then just quickly go into the duodenum, but it needs to mix with the acid, the hydrochloric acid. We would call this the gastric juice, which contains the acid, the mucus, pepsinogens, and intrinsic factor. These are all involved in protein breakdown and also for vitamin D production and such. So very important, so that we have all these chemicals and such interacting with the food, and they're going to be like kind of like a sloshing back and forth of the material within the stomach as a result of these contractions that are the, let me show you this here for a moment. So you see here with this image, we see layers of the smooth muscle. Well, you can see that the fibers are going in different directions. You're on an angle, you're in this direction, then we have crossway in this direction. So when there's contraction that's taking place, we're really having this movement of material back and forth between what's called the fundus area right here and the pyloric region here. So it's moving back and forth mechanically and chemically, breaking down materials, and to the term where then we take this chyme from the bolus to the chyme, it becomes, and little bits of it are squirted out into the duodenum, the beginning of the small intestines. Okay, so the small intestines are known as the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. The duodenum would be that beginning portion, and it's really less than a foot long. And that's the area where digestion is primarily taking place, where the breakdown of the nutrients, the chyme, is interacting with chemicals that are sent from the pancreas. We'll see that in a moment. And then they all kind of like mix together and start to break down fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. All right, so we went over the gastric juice. So you'll see here that this the acidity of the stomach is important because when we take in nutrients, when we take in food, there always have some type of bacteria present within. Now, the bacteria, for the most part, are harmless, but there are some bacteria that are not harmless. And so the acidity of the stomach will destroy most of the microbes, most of the microorganisms. Not all, but most. There are some that can survive in an acidic environment, and these are what can make us sick and end up getting ulcers, actual breakdown of the stomach wall and creating an opening, which is not a very good or positive thing, and it can lead to pain and discomfort and really be a nasty thing. So these pepsins, these proteins are present that will help to aid in protein digestion. There's mucus that's being produced because why would there be mucus produced in the stomach? Because the stomach is very acidic, the chemical juices, right? So we don't want to have those juices, those acidic juices, breaking down and digesting our own stomach itself. Now, this again can take place as a result of peptic ulcers, but that's not a good thing or a positive thing. So to prevent that, we have this very thick and powerful mucus that protects the lining of the stomach, as well as a bicarbonate, which is being released that helps to neutralize acid on the stomach wall itself. Okay. Now look at this here. It says here 2 to 6 hours for a full stomach to empty. That's quite a long time. It takes a while. It's not a very fast process. It's a slower process that it needs in order to kind of, have all of the material that you've taken in, as far as that bolus, be exposed to the different digestive enzymes and juices there to break them down. But like I said to you, that primarily digestion is not done in the stomach. It's really going to be finished in the duodenum, in the small intestines. And I mentioned to you about those rugae, those folds that allow for the stomach to expand. We went over this, and here you're just seeing that there are these folds, these rugae present within the stomach. Now the small intestine, now look at this, right? So the small intestine, the beginning of the small intestine, the duodenum, it's only about a foot long. But the remainder of the small intestine, so you're looking at 19 feet or more, would be then the jejunum and the ileum, the two other areas or regions of the small intestine. And not only does digestion take place in the duodenum, the beginning of the small intestine, but absorption of the nutrients is going to take place primarily in this, well, it will take place within the small intestine. So the small intestine are going to be covered in these little villi and microvilli that will enhance or increase the surface area to allow for absorption of the nutrients. Very important. So you'll see here that there are folds. See how there are folds? And then even on the folds, there are numerous folds. So there are these different types of structures here that are folds in villi and microvilli. So then the villi themselves are covered in microvilli, and these will allow for increase in surface area to allow for absorption of nutrients. So really what you can think of is that if you have any idea of like how large a tennis court is, So the absorptive surface area for absorption of nutrients in the human body, approximately the size of, if you were to determine how much of surface area is absorbed, would be the size of a tennis court, that's really big, right? So understand that all these folds, and more folds are, and we call them villi, are present in order to increase the surface area and allow for an absorptive surface to take in the nutrients and then bring them to the cardiovascular system as well as to the lymphatic system. Now, the pancreas is a very important structure and gland in that this pancreas can produce these digestive enzymes as well as produce and be a part of the endocrine system. And we talked about that as far as when you're thinking of insulin and glucagon. Okay? So the pancreas has dual functions in dual systems. And so the digestive enzymes are very important, very key, and helping to break down carbohydrates, proteins, lipids. Oh, what did I say here? Nucleic acids. I haven't really been talking about the nucleic acids, but know that in each cell of whatever we're taking in, within the cell, there's a nucleus. And within the nucleus, there are these nucleic acids, right? DNA, RNA. And so realize that you have to break those down also. So we have enzymes for all of these to break down. Okay? Enzymes are proteins, and enzymes work to speed the process of breaking down the nutrients into smaller forms that we can be able to absorb them into their more. So when we think of like a carbohydrate, and we think of really like what's called like a polysaccharide would be a very large carbohydrate, and a monosaccharide would be a very small carbohydrate. Well, the monosaccharides are the tinier carbohydrates that we're able to, the smaller, that we're able to absorb into the body. Okay. The term bile. Bile, think of bile as helping to work with the breakdown of fats that we take into our body as far as nutrients are concerned. Bile would be similar to like Dawn dish detergent, right? Dawn dish detergent. You know, like you take that dish detergent and you squirt it into a pan that's really oily, and what does it do? It breaks the fat globules into smaller fat globs, so to speak. And it's not involved in digestion, it's just involved in breaking down. But then you have different types of lipases. So, nope, sorry. That's a lipase. A lipase is an enzyme for fat. Okay? A lipase is an enzyme for fats. So know that bile, it's not an enzyme, right? Bile is a specific type of liquid that's able to be breaking down the fats into smaller globs, and then in turn for then the lipases to work to break them down for absorption. So you'll see here that we have the stomach, the duodenum, the pancreas, and the liver. Now the liver right now in this image, it's just being picked up a little bit, but really the liver would be covering a portion. It would be down here more, right, the liver. And what's going on is that all of these are very closely connected because the stomach, here's the cardiac region of the esophagus. We have the stomach breaking down nutrients into chyme, the bolus into chyme. Then we have it being released into the duodenum. Well, you'll see here that the gallbladder will store the excess bile, but bile will be produced by the liver. It'll enter into these tubes, enter into the duodenum. The pancreatic juices will enter into the duodenum, and we have that chyme entering into the duodenum. So we have all these different liquids mixing together and working together to break down the food into smaller pieces that can be absorbed by the small intestine. All right, so you'll see here as far as the liver plays a very important part as far as really multiple functions. You'll see here that it says here, so the liver function, so producing bile. synthesizing important proteins in the blood plasma. We call them plasma proteins. Okay, one of those plasma proteins would be immunoglobulins. Immunoglobulins are a type of plasma protein present within the blood that are antibiotics. Okay, not antibiotics, antibodies. Sorry, antibodies. And so these different types of plasma proteins are present throughout the blood. They're circulating throughout the blood, and albumin is the primary plasma protein present within the blood. Okay. We also have store excess blood glucose as glycogen. So glycogen is a larger structure. Glucose is a smaller structure. Right? Glucose can be readily absorbed by our cells of our body. Glycogen cannot. So glycogen needs to be broken down into glucose, but glucose is stored as glycogen within the liver and also skeletal muscle. Removal of hormones that serve their functions from the blood, removal of ingestive toxins, so really detoxifying the body. The liver is important in that. Such as alcohol. So think about what happens to the liver as a result of a patient abusing alcohol for many years. The liver really gets diseased. Cirrhosis of the liver, it becomes replaced with fatty tissue, it be replaced with scar tissue, so that it's not going to properly filter the blood, and so it really loses its function. And this is what happens at end stage type liver type disease as a result of, so in particular, alcoholic cirrhosis. There's non-alcoholic cirrhosis, and that's just a matter of other disease processes taking place, also causing to destroy the liver function. And then storage of some vitamins and minerals. So the liver, very, very important structure. So it processes incoming nutrients. By this hepatic portal system really helps to divert a good portion of the blood supply from the small intestines into the liver, because the liver has to produce a lot of these proteins. So the liver is involved in synthesis, production of proteins. So it needs a fresh blood supply from the digestive system in order to do that. Okay? Again, we talked about removal of alcohol, ammonia, products of protein metabolism, ammonia, inactivates many hormones, takes up bilirubin. So this pigment is formed by aging or damaged red blood cells. And then what will happen is that the pigments that are being broken down by the liver then will help to color your urine and your feces as a result of these pigments. Now, this is something on the right that's quite remarkable. So I said to you about the gallbladder. The gallbladder does not produce anything. It just takes the bile that's produced by the liver and stores the excess of it. And can there be times when there can be these gallstones produced within here? And that's huge. That's like the whole gallbladder is full of this stone. It's terrible. It can be very painful and lead to all kinds of discomfort, trouble with digestion. So I said to you that the small intestine has three parts: the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. Okay? The duodenum is the beginning portion. I said about the size, about 12 inches. It's really between 8 and 12 inches, more closer to the 8-inch mark, but it can be approximately 12 inches, 1 foot long. And then the jejunum and the ileum are the remaining 19 foot of the small intestines. And again, absorption is taking place within the small intestines. Digestion in the duodenum, and then absorption. So fat digestion, I said to you, that requires the bile to break down the fat. So it's emulsifying it, emulsifying large fat units into smaller ones, and then the enzymes, the lipases, will break it down for absorption. Segmentation is just a type of contraction, of smooth muscle contraction, that helps to move the material through the intestines, and also helps in aiding in mixing of the material of the chyme, and eventually becoming the feces in the colon in the large intestines. You'll see here that we have these different types of enzymes that are present in order to break down the different nutrients. So you see here, we said carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and nucleic acids. So DNA and RNA, you see right here, right? So the pancreas is producing the majority of these. Okay, the pancreas is producing these, except for in the fact of, in the case of like salivary amylase, or how about pepsin and different other protein enzymes that are present within the stomach. But then you'll see here that really pancreas, 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 right? These are, and then you'll see here also intestinal lining for some additional enzymes. So this is a little bit of a scary image here, but I'm not asking you to commit this to memory, but just showing you how what's taking place as far as how we'll have material go from the lumen, the inner portion of the tube of the digestive tract. We're taking in these nutrients, breaking them down, and then they will in turn pass through the small intestine and then enter into the bloodstream and into the interstitial fluid and be able to be passed and sent throughout the whole body as far as the transport of nutrients to all the cells of the body. Okay. Now, the large intestine, anything not absorbed in the small intestine, then will move into the large intestine. And what's going to happen is that primarily we're going to remove the majority of the water from the material that's entering into the large intestines. Also know this, which is really, this is kind of shocking, really. Think about this. The bacteria live within our bodies. They'll live on our bodies, and they'll live in certain areas of our body. Not all areas, but in particular in the colon, also known as the large intestines. They're present, and they help to produce vitamins interacting with the remaining nutrients that are present within the colon, and making up 1/3 of the dry weight of your feces. So imagine if you had a big, it's gross, but a container of your feces, 1/3 of that would be as a result of the dead bacteria that are present in your, you have millions of bacteria present living within, and they're there for a good reason, and you're healthy if they're there. Now, you take antibiotics in order to kill bacteria that you have, say, a sinus infection, or if you have some other infection in your body. So you'll take antibiotics and they'll kill and they'll destroy those bad bacteria. But they can also kill the healthy bacteria, the good bacteria that are living within you. And so there can be times when your intestinal microbiome, they used to call it the intestinal flora, reminiscent of like plant life and such, but really the microbiome is a better way to put these little microorganisms and how we describe them in our body. Interesting here how eating will trigger the colon, the large intestines, to contract, which will in turn move food from a proximal to distal out of your body over time. So here we have, in this image here, here's the end of the distal portion of the ileum of the small intestine. It enters into this area right here via the ileocecal valve, and then it enters into what's called the cecum. And here you'll see a little piece right here. It's called the appendix, little structure here that can get inflamed. It can get an infection present and be very painful and make you very sick. So you'll see here then the ascending, transverse, descending colon. And you have the sigmoid colon, and you have the rectum, and then the anus. Okay? So this is the latter portion of the digestive tract. So nerves and hormones, right? These hormones are part of the endocrine system, and they are different types of chemicals that will help to regulate food digestion, very important. Okay, you'll see here that there are endocrine cells in the GI tract itself, which will in turn help to produce certain types of hormones, secretin, gastrin, CCK, cholecystokinin, right? Very important as far as contributing to the enzymatic breakdown of the substances present within the digestive tract. So you'll see here that, and this is quite interesting. So we have this acidic chyme, right? Stimulates the release of the hormone secretin in the small intestine. So right here, duodenum. So this is the beginning of that small intestines right in through in there. Then you have the remaining of the small intestines, jejunum, and then ileum, right? Again, that's approximately 18, 19 feet right here. Only approximately less than 1 foot is that duodenum. So you have this acidic chyme, because remember, it's very acidic, present within the stomach. this hormone secretin will inhibit motility in the small intestine and stimulate bicarbonate secretion into the duodenum. So what's going on is that this secretin, this hormone, will help to slow down the process of movement in the small intestine so that the small intestines can absorb, right? Absorb the nutrients that are present within, passing through the small intestines. And also this bicarbonate, that bicarbonate will help to neutralize the acid, because again, the chyme is very acidic, so it'll help to neutralize the acid and not have it so acidic present within the remaining portion of the digestive tract. Okay. Also, you'll see here that fat in the chyme, fat in the nutrients, the fats that are present, stimulate the release of this CCK, cholecystokinin, which will inhibit stomach emptying and stimulate the secretion of pancreatic enzymes. So again, to all contributing to, hey, pancreas, secrete these specific enzymes that will help to break down the foodstuffs, and in particular, for the fats, it's lipase, right? And then you'll see here, as far as food entering the GI tract, stimulates GIP secretion, which is also another hormone, which will trigger the release of hormone insulin. And insulin will do what? Insulin will help the nutrients that are being broken down, particularly we're thinking of glucose, entering into the cells of the body. And so that's very important. So see here, insulin stimulates the uptake of glucose from the blood and into then the cells of the body. Very important. So what type of disorders? Well, I mentioned to you earlier there regarding cirrhosis, right? So this long-term inflammation, and really, unfortunately, right, it's the abuse of alcohol can lead to then the destruction of your liver, as far as it becoming fatty, becoming filled, the good healthy tissue being replaced with scar type tissue, and so it's not going to act as a filter, in addition to its other functions of synthesis of different proteins and such. So you'll see here hepatitis. So you've all heard of the term hepatitis, and there are different types of hepatitis. Hepatitis A, B, C, there are many different types of, they're viral, okay, as a result of viruses, causing an inflammation of the liver, and again, destroying the liver. Heartburn, when we think of, I mentioned to you about that reflux of acids, that acidic juices going up into the esophagus as a result of that gastroesophageal sphincter not working properly, aka the cardiac sphincter. So you have acids going backward, going from distal to proximal, entering into the esophagus, never a positive thing, leads to all kinds of, it can lead to precancerous cells being formed as a result of the irritation, the chronic irritation of the esophagus. Constipation, we get that, and this can be, now I would tell you, so, all right. So when we think of constipation, understand that the amount of pain medication that's being abused. Now today, we hope that it's less than what it was years ago, since we've really addressed the problem and tried to really limit the amount of very strong pain medications that patients can use for extended periods of time. But the use of pain medication can lead to constipation. It can lead to very uncomfortable and painful constipation. And this is no good, because really that material, that fecal material, is meant to move through the body and go out. It's not meant to stay for extended periods of time, where it can lead to getting more of the moisture can be removed, so it gets hard, right, dry and hardened, and really very painful to come out. Diverticulitis. This is an inflammation of diverticula, which are little pouches that are present within the colon. So let me show you what diverticuli look like. So diverticula, here we go. So let's take a look at here and see. So if you'll see on this image to your right, on your left, you'll see that this is a healthy colon. Okay? Well, one that's diseased with diverticula, you'll see that there are these little pouches, and these pouches can get infected and inflamed, and that becomes diverticulitis. And that's a very painful condition, and that can lead to actually those little pockets of tissue of the colon can burst, and then that would mean that there would be material from your digestive tract, feces, entering into the peritoneum, into your abdominal cavity. That's very bad. That could be a life emergency. Okay, that's extremely, it can be very painful, but that can also be life-threatening. Okay? Let's see. So the diverticula, these are just little pouches. The diverticulitis, this is an infection of those little pouches, and again can lead to peritonitis. Irritable bowel syndrome. So this is also known as IBS. Most common intestinal disorder, abdominal pain, alternation between diarrhea and constipation. This can affect the entire digestive tract. Okay? Crohn's disease is another type of disorder that can affect the digestive tract and lead to damaging of the intestinal lining. Any type of cancerous type issues. Well, you might have heard of a term called a polyp. A polyp are these precancerous lesions that if a patient has a colonoscopy, the doctor is able to view these polyps and say, hey, okay, they're present there. We're going to snip them, remove them, and take them out of the colon so that they don't have a chance to become cancerous. All right. So proper screening regarding colorectal cancer, very important. And the looking for these polyps so that we can remove them prior to them becoming cancerous. So know that cancer type processes are cells that are our own cells that have mutated, and they're rapidly dividing out of control and stealing the nutrition from the healthy cells, and the cancer cells are taking over that nutrition and starving the body, and starving the healthy cells, and eventually killing the body. Here we have those polyps that I just mentioned to you about, and they need to be removed in order to prevent them from becoming cancerous. This is very common, folks, as far as people who are lactose intolerant. You know, we're meant to take our mother's milk as far as breast milk, and that's fine. But having dairy, cow's milk and such, that's something that, you know, a little bit is okay. Too much is not really healthy or good. And so we can also have a deficiency of this hormone, this lactase, this enzyme that helps to break down the milk sugar lactose. Gluten intolerance would be folks that are, my wife is gluten intolerant. Now she doesn't suffer from celiac disease, but she has an issue with processing of gluten. So we buy a lot of gluten-free type breads and pasta and different things. And there are many things actually that contain gluten that you wouldn't realize. Even substances like ketchup, right, contain it. But gluten is also can trigger an immune response, and in particular celiac disease it really triggers an autoimmune response where the body starts attacking its own cells and tissues. That's never a good thing. CF, cystic fibrosis, this is a type of illness that can affect it. It's an illness that is the patient would be born with, and whether it's genetic as far as being passed from parents to the child, or a mutation, spontaneous mutation that takes place during development that can allow for this child to not only have issues with breathing and excessive mucus production, so that's difficult to breathe, and that they are continually producing a lot of mucus, so they have to spit it out. But how about when it's present within your digestive tract, your respiratory tract that's deep, you have to do things like wear a vest that will vibrate, and it'll vibrate in such a fashion that it'll help to produce, loosen the mucus so that you can spit it out. Yeah, it's pretty rough stuff. And so it's difficult for them to breathe, as well as this mucus will then clog up areas in the pancreas and such that will lead to blockage of enzymes being produced, blockage of enzymes being released, as well as being produced. So CF is a CF usually is an illness that leads to an early death for patients. Diarrhea we get, as a result of, could be as a result of some type of infection or food poisoning, or as a result of a virus. Peptic ulcer, I mentioned earlier there, as far as an open sore, so an opening in the stomach lining or in the small intestines, usually in the duodenum. Food poisoning, mentioned to you there, is a result of a bacteria. The Salmonella bacteria is one of them that can cause food poisoning. And so but there are other types of food poisoning. That's just one in particular. It's pretty common. And know that really the balance of nutrients that need to go to the brain, and primarily to the brain, but to all the other cells of the body, the digestive system plays a key important component to making sure that this distribution of the nutrients gets to all the cells and tissues of the body. Right? And by doing that, but prior to that, it needs to, where it says here, breaking it down into its more smaller components that they can be readily available for the cells and tissues of the body. And then eliminating anything that would be waste,